Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. If people can take their seats. Welcome to the House Transportation Finance Committee. I'm Frank Hornstein, the chair, and I want to just lay out our agenda for the day and make some brief opening comments about the hearing and our process for addressing this very important issue that we're going to be discussing today. We have two parts to the hearing. The first part, we are going to address the issue of the Northstar Commuter Rail and some of the delays that have taken place there. They are a bit related to the broader issue that we're talking about, which is the impact of oil freight transportation in our state via train and pipeline. What we're going to be doing today is informational only. There is no bill on the table. There has been no bill drafted related to this issue. Myself and Senator Dibble have drafted some ideas and some concepts that we're discussing with stakeholders and state agencies, but we don't anticipate a bill being introduced in the near future, at least within the next week. I am very pleased with the level of interest in this issue and the number of people that have signed up to testify today. And for that reason, we're going to get through as much of this as possible. But I know how things work in legislative committees. We're likely to have a lot of questions. I think that sometimes testimony goes on, it can go on unpredictably long. I'm going to try my best to move this along today. However, I think we can count on the fact that this hearing will be continued into Tuesday, because I want to not give short shrift to any of the stakeholders that are here today. And those include our state agencies, and that's really going to be the primary focus today, is to get a sense from the agencies that are involved in regulating oil transportation traffic in the state, again via pipeline and rail, their perspective on the issue. We're going to hear from first responders and those that literally work on the railroad. We're going to hear from the railroads themselves. And we have a couple of citizens that have signed up as well. So, again, we are going to try to get to as much of this as possible, but I think everyone should plan that this hearing will be continued on Tuesday in our normal hearing time in this room. And then we probably will have one more hearing to hear a bill related to this. Again, I'm thinking on or around March 12th, but that's subject to change. And if we do legislation on this topic, it will very likely need to not only pass our committee, but go to the Public Safety Committee. And so we have, as you know, a very compressed timeline. But what we need to do today, members, is really get an oil freight safety 101 lesson from our stakeholders. And those are primarily going to be, again, from our state agencies, but others. So are there any questions about process and where we're headed on this issue in our committee? Hearing today, hearing on March 5th, likely hearing on March 12th if we do a bill, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, with that, we want to spend our first 15-20 minutes today addressing the issue of the Northstar commuter delays. And we have, I think, some people from the BNSF that I'd like to call up first to testify, and we'll just simply go from there. So we have, okay, wonderful, there you are. Welcome to the committee, and please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Brian Sweeney, Assistant Regional Vice President of State Government Affairs for BNSF Railway Company. I understand, of course, the concerns about the service levels that have been experienced on Northstar the last couple of months. BNSF is involved in commuter operations in several cities and passenger operations with Amtrak. we have a pretty good record for providing high-quality service. We have been providing high-quality service for Northstar up until the month of December. The primary problem has been an incredibly brutal winter that plays havoc with train operations. The cold weather affects track, it affects equipment, it affects people, and all of those factors contribute to the service problems that we've been having. We recognize that this has been a major inconvenience for a number of people who rely on this service. We're doing what we can to try and recover. If I could give a quick history of the service for the full year of 2013, our on-time performance was in the 98% range. Our lowest month, our poorest month in the year 2013, I believe, was about 97.5% on-time performance. But suddenly in December, that dropped down to 90%. And in January, it was about 88%. And February probably is going to check in somewhere around the same level. It's a dramatic drop in the last 2 months. And again, I would attribute it primarily to the weather issues that have been causing all kinds of problems. Metra, the agency that provides commuter service in Chicago, has had a similar experience. Metra service is provided not just by BNSF, but by a number of other freight railroads, as well as on lines that are owned and operated by Metra itself. All across the board in Chicago, service has dropped dramatically since the start of the year. Their average for 2013 was something like 95% on-time performance. For the month of January, it was 85%. And again, Metra has been attributing that primarily to the weather, the issues caused by weather. As I said, the weather affects the track, switches freeze, ice buildups, things of that nature. Metal becomes brittle. The metal on the rail cars becomes brittle. It's in sub-zero temperatures. It's tougher to maintain the brake pressure in our trains. And then it also affects the people. We have people, well, I'm sure all of us were complaining this morning about the temperature outside. We have a number of people who have to be outside working under these conditions, maintaining and repairing track, maintaining and repairing equipment. For their personal safety, we can only have them working outside for a maximum of 20 minutes at a time, followed by 10 minutes inside to warm up. So everything that goes wrong takes longer to repair. And when you have a problem with one train, it has a ripple effect up and down the system. It's not just that one location. It's trains, it's blocking trains coming in, going around. It has a large, any event can have a large consequence. And that's, it's not meant as an excuse. It's an explanation that, as we've all seen, this weather has played havoc with all modes of transportation. And it's been very noticeable with the Northstar service.
So thank you very much for that, Mr. Sweeney. So I've seen a number of press reports that have also not only looked at the weather as a factor, but the significant increase in freight, particularly the oil freight. And we had a commuter quoted in the paper the other day saying that they were waiting at a Northstar platform and saw oil trains go by. So clearly the track and the infrastructure was working for that. So could you discuss the difference in traffic that you're experiencing from the transport of oil through Minnesota through this particular Northstar corridor, and how that relates to this problem? Because we've had, not like this winter, but there have been some cold days where in years past where this hasn't been an issue. But again, we're seeing people who are eyewitnesses to trains going by bearing oil and not commuter trains. So could you comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the oil traffic is not the factor. We had the same number of oil trains in the month of November, and our Northstar service was 98%. All through the autumn, we had the same volume of oil traffic. We also had a late, very compressed harvest season with an increased amount of grain traffic flowing in a short period in the fall. We also had our annual Christmas rush, if you will, of intermodal traffic, the containers on flat cars, that always spikes in the fall. So we had that traffic all has been growing, and still we were able to maintain 98% on-time performance for Northstar in the month of November. It's what's compounded or caused the real problem has been the winter conditions have created the havoc. As for spotting the oil train coming first, I was talking to somebody in our operating department yesterday about that, and it's basically the traffic is plugged up, the oil train is there, it's ahead of the commuter train. There are only so many places where you can go around somebody on a siding and do a crossover, and they had to clear that. This past weekend there was a major outage. There was a switch over by Union Station at a place called Hoffman Junction, where BNSF and CP Railroad, Union Pacific operates in there as well. It's a key point on the rail system, national rail system. There was a switch that was burned out for pretty much the entire weekend. That caused an incredible backlog of traffic. And so when Monday morning Northstar service was supposed to start up, we had all these freight trains that we had to get out of the way, basically, in order to run the Northstar service. That was why they were seeing this type of traffic and making the logical assumption would be they must be holding the suburban train or the commuter train for the oil train. That wasn't the case. It was just they had to clear the traffic out.
And I have one final question, and we'll see if members have additional questions for you. And again, thank you for being here. What kind of communication do you have with Metro Transit when these occurrences happen? I know that I have concerns that it seems like it's been sort of a last-minute kind of thing, and Metro Transit's sort of been left holding the bag, not knowing what's going on. What's the communication between you and them like, and when you face these challenges and these seems to be unplanned events? It seems that communication would be of the utmost importance here.
Mr. Chair, I would have to check on exactly what the protocols are for communication. As you said, unplanned situations, if we know something's coming up, we should do a good job or try to do a good job of giving early warning to them so that they can make alternative plans if that's going to be necessary. I can check on what the protocols are and what we have in place for the standard process of communicating with them when we do anticipate a problem. Get back to you with that.
Okay, thank you. I have 3 members that have questions, and let's try to move this along as best we can. We have Representative Bernardi, Representative Howe, and Representative Benson. Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Sweeney, I was just at a city council meeting, and this was one of the major issues that was brought up, was the reliability of the service and also the safety of the service. They really felt frustrated. I could tell just in their comments and their voices, and people are coming together throughout that corridor to try to address this issue. It has to do with communication. How engaged is BSNF with this group and the people in the community to make sure that they have confidence in your service and that the community is being lifted up as an extreme high priority for the railroad?
Mr. Sweeney.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we do need to take a look at what the communication procedures are. Reliability, of course, is very critical to having an established commuter operation. Up until December, we did have that. We had a very good record. We have to reestablish that and win back the confidence on reliability. No question about it.
And so, Mr. Chair, my question, the central question that I'm trying to ask is what kind of communication are you having with the communities and to help them know what you guys are doing to help the communities have good service and safe service?
Mr. Chair, Representative, again, I would have to check on what type of direct communication we do with the cities. We communicate with the agency. I don't know what direct communications we have with the communities themselves on commuter matters.
Thank you, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess some of this has already been alluded to, but I've got folks that, and I rode the Northstar Rail for a year, so I'm very attuned to how it operates. But I've had folks email me saying that especially on the 5 o'clock train, they get notified at 5:15 on the 5:01 train that, guess what, they're going to be a half hour delayed. Well, that to me is unacceptable for them to make plans that they should be looking at alternative routes to get to work. Because many of them have been put on notice that they've been late so many times because of their transportation issues using the Northstar that now they could be in jeopardy of losing their jobs. So I think we need to do a better job there. In fact, I know that they did get notices in the mail saying that they apologized, or they got an apology saying that it was an unacceptable notification process. But when you talk about having the problems with the cold weather, have you looked at, I guess my question is when you know you've got cold weather and you know you have these problems, has there been any increase in staffing so you can have continuous operations, or are we leaving staffing alone and then slowing the process down?
Mr. Sweeney.
Mr. Chair, Representative, all across this part of the railroad, we've been having problems related to the weather. We've taken a number of steps to try and alleviate the situation, bringing in additional locomotives, additional train sets for handling excess or unanticipated shipments of coal, for example. We've been bringing in crews from other parts of the railroad to this part of the system to try and help with the backlog and try to keep current with what's been taking place. We have been taking some steps. It has been a brutal winter. We need to do what we can, though, obviously, to restore the confidence of reliable service.
Thank you for that. But when we talk about on-time performance, can you give us what your definition, because everybody's got a different definition of on-time performance. What is that measure of on-time performance?
Under the contract that we have with the agency, there's a time, and then it's plus or minus a few minutes, I guess. And we've been hitting that at 98%. The actual time has been something like 96%, which is still a very good standard.
How?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking for what is that plus or minus? I mean, an airline is what, plus or minus 15 minutes or a half hour? What is our definition here? Do we know what that is? Is it 15 minutes? Is it a half hour? Is it an hour?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'll have to check on exactly what the standard is under the contract.
Representative Howe, one more.
One more. And I think this is well known out there, but I'd like to put it out there. Who does have priority on the rail, freight or passenger?
Mr. Chair, Representative, the passenger service gets priority. I mean, we have an obligation. We have an agreement to provide that service. We have been providing very high-quality service up until the last couple months. As I said, the same problems that you see with the service here, you're also seeing in Chicago with multiple railroads, including lines that are owned by the agency. Their service is off by about 10%, down to 85%. They've been experiencing the same problems we have. Metra, in their report, attributes it primarily to weather conditions. They noted that they had 9 days below zero in January of 2014, and that being a factor. And obviously, if 9 days below zero can be a factor in this location, it's been worse. But we have been providing a high-level service, whether 96% if you go by actual time is still a very good level of service.
Thank you very much. Representative Benson, then Beard, and then we have, I think, one other person that we want to hear from on this segment. Representative Benson.
Thank you, Chairman Hornstein. I guess I want to point out that this has been a terribly cold winter. For most of us, we'd like for it to be over. And, thank you for the testifier to have the courage and come in and talk. I think we knew which way it was going to go. I don't want to diminish the frustration of the people who ride the Northstar, but the simple fact is this has been a terrible winter. For those of you who didn't notice, we had people that came in 2 hours from Buffalo this morning, and what do we contribute that to? So I think, and if you look at the airlines, for instance, the thousands of flights that have been delayed, we don't have the airlines in here, and because we could level the same kind of criticisms about them. So I just kind of want to temper it a little bit before we get carried away with these uber criticisms about how things are run and not take into account that every form of transportation in and around the Minnesota, Minneapolis metro area has been slowed considerably for the same reasons that have been given by our testifier this morning. So thank you for coming.
Well, Representative Benson, the difference is that passengers on airlines are notified sometimes 24 hours ahead of time, and we have people standing outside at frozen train stops not knowing when they're going to have service. Representative Beard.
Just a follow-up to that, though. But you're not notified when you're going to have a 2-hour delay on the road to get in from Buffalo. So just temper it a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Beard.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, it's flying all over on this side of the table. I'll try to get control of the conversation.
The personalities are on the left side of the table.
I think we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sweeney, this is a fascinating discussion because I'm harking back to the early 80s whenever I used to run those trains, and we had some brutally cold weather. By the way, Minnesota, I think this morning was 47 days below zero, and it was 13 below at my house this morning. The point is, there was actually a timetable rule that when the temperature dropped below a certain temperature, speeds were reduced dramatically. Do we do that on that corridor up there? I know it's a pretty substantial corridor you have running up to St. Cloud, but when the temperatures drop, and you might have talked about this before I come in, I apologize, I was navigating Representative Mahoney's streets and trying to get here. So, but when the speed drops, does the speed drop? Don't we slow the trains down? Doesn't that affect the throughput? I mean, besides burning a switch out at Hoffman Avenue Yard, doesn't that have an effect on the overall throughput of your route?
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we have a number of operating changes that go into effect in cold weather, not only speed of trains, but also the length of trains, which means that we have to run more trains to move the same number of cars. And those factors contribute to the capacity of the track.
Mr. Chair, I thought it was important to make that point, that whenever cold weather hits, there's more than just oil moving because people are demanding more of it, but the trains are shorter because of brake pipe problems and the track pull-aparts. You can't run 79 miles an hour. You've got to slow things down, and that affects the throughput pretty substantially, which leads me to my last question for you. In your contract with the Metropolitan Transit to run the trains, obviously you staff the trains, you run the trains, you dispatch the trains. Whose responsibility is it for customer service? Is it BNSF's to contact the stations or to do the posting, or do you contact Met Council, and is Met Council actually responsible for the customer service, Mr. Sweeney?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I have to admit that I don't know who has direct responsibility or who has responsibility for direct communication with each station, if that's to come out of us or the agency.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't know the answer.
Well, I think that's a very good transition, Representative Beard, to, I think, calling on someone that may have some perspective on this. I understand Brian Lamb is here from Metro Transit. Thank you very much, Mr. Sweeney, and maybe you can stick around here if there's some additional perspective. You could, Mr. Lamb, you can just have a seat next to Mr. Sweeney. And welcome to the committee, and please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Brian Lamb. I'm General Manager for Metro Transit, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Lots of questions raised. Let me just start out with a very factual statement. Customers on Northstar depend on reliability. That's the reason why they take Northstar. And frankly, that's one of the things that, in partnership with BNSF, that over the course of the first 4 years we were able to do and deliver consistently. One of the reasons why Northstar ridership grew 16% in our weekly commuter ridership was just that. The ability, this last year, the ability over time to deliver on-time performance. And on-time performance in our contract with BNSF is defined as within 5 minutes of scheduled time. However, the definition of what is considered on time or what are contributing reasons is not contractually exactly the same with what the customer experiences. There are other factors that BNSF, when they report on-time performance and record it, it's different from what the customer perspective. Our comparable numbers, for example, for January and February, are closer to 75% on time for each one of those months. And when we were talking about on time, we're talking about usually in excess of 10 and many times in more than 20 minutes of delay. And let me, if I could, Mr. Chair, just try to address a couple of the key questions that were raised. Part of this really involves kind of the communication and the coordination with the individual customer, because the illustration for the customer waiting on the platform is exactly correct, but also there's the illustration of the customer who is stuck on the train, who may be stuck on the train for an indeterminate amount of time for up to an hour. You know, and I think Representative Howe's point about employers only having so much patience is exactly where we need to be considered and focused on it. And to their credit, we have been in daily communication with not only the operations people at BNSF, but really with corporate leaders in trying to figure this out. And there have been several modifications that we've made. First of all, it became apparent in January that our up-to-the-minute communication with our customers was lacking. It wasn't really as needed up until this time, but with the winter conditions. So we've actually put communication people in our control center from essentially 5 in the morning through 7 p.m. so that we can pass through on real-time basis every piece of information we get from BNSF. But let me be clear that it's absolutely fluid to the extent that what starts out look like, oh, there's a delay, it might be 10 minutes. We might hear 10 minutes later, it looks like it's going to be a half an hour. And that is an extremely frustrating situation for customers to be in and to experience. So one of the things we did is we've applied what we call a subscription service. Most people, of course, now carry electronic devices on. So what we do now, in over the course of 2 weeks, we had 700 people sign up for that subscription. Now that's probably a good thing, but it also says I need to get better informed of what's really going on. So it's kind of representative of kind of the desperation that some of our customers were feeling. But nonetheless, we have 700 customers on a daily basis that are getting up to the minute status on the communication. So I think, and we're getting more timely information from the dispatch center through the operations to our control center so we can send that back out to our customers. The other thing, though, is the art of service recovery. We are finding ourselves, if there's a Murphy's Law, then I believe that I'm Murphy. Because ultimately anything that could have gone wrong in the last couple of months on Northstar has gone wrong. A perfect example was Monday morning. Monday morning looked like it was going to be a pretty clear morning. Every single morning at 4 o'clock, my chief operating officer is in contact with the on-the-ground coordinator with BNSF, and they're looking at what the alignment looks like, the 40-mile stretch. And we either get the green light, the yellow light, or the red light at that point. And most of the time we're getting the green light. But we got the green light on Monday morning. And what happens is that because of the backups, crews ultimately can only go so long before they need to be changed. And unfortunately, the replacement crew taxi was delayed, and so every customer that was intending to take Northstar felt the impact of that delayed taxi and relief. And ultimately, the first train in was delayed over an hour. And, and so the question is, what can we at Metro Transit do to kind of put some belts and suspenders until we get, more of a permanent solution, hopefully a weather-related improvement as well? And one of the things we have done just this last week is we've dispatched buses, and not that we have a lot of extra buses, but we dispatch buses proactively to 2 key locations every single morning on the Northstar line, so that we can provide some emergency services in the event of extensive delays. So we have buses dispatched to both Elk River and Coon Rapids so that we get kind of some timeliness associated with emergency support. But the capacity of the buses is far different than being able to provide, capacity for 500 people at least per train. And so we can only really provide, realistically, emergency support services.
Okay, thank you. I have Representative Benson.
Thank you, Chairman Hornstein. Yeah, you covered it somewhat. You have 700 subscribers to an alert system, if you will. And given the experience of the winter, I'm wondering, it's not an exact science, but we're still able to give road advisories, days, 2 days, a day and 24 hours in advance. Might this experience behoove you to begin looking at some process, at least, that would say, we know it's going to be 15 below. I think we knew last Saturday that this was going to be an extremely cold day. Now you have data to say, we could experience this. Can we develop something similar to the airlines, if you will, saying that we know they're going to have cancellations, an advisory that would go out and say, you may need to consider there could be delays up to?
Mr. Lamb.
Mr. Chair, Representative Benson, we definitely can do that. I will say that is counter to everything that we want to do, however. We want to correct the problem. Today, for example, we're building, in the art of recovery, it's one step at a time, and we're now on 6 peak hours in a row where we've delivered every single train on time, inbound and outbound. And this was a cold day. This is a day where customers would actually want to depend on Metro Transit and the Northstar line because they don't want to be able to be in their car an indeterminate amount of time with the road conditions and the extreme cold weather being what it is. So we have, on a daily basis, as I said earlier before, we get that assessment starting at 4 o'clock of what the main line really looks like. And we have started to really proactively communicate that to customers. The most customers, by and large, who drive to a park and ride. So they have options by and large.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question from Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is not for Mr. Lamb. This is for the representative from the BNSF. If the Hoffman line had been updated and modernized so that you wouldn't have had the backup there, how much faster could you have moved the backlog so that it would not have affected commuter lines or rail lines of any sorts?
Mr. Chair, Representative, it's really impossible to say if...
Give me a guess.
I really can't guess, because would that switch have been replaced, the cause of the switch going out, the switch motor going out and so on? It's impossible to say if the weather would have affected a new switch or not. Had the switch not malfunctioned, however, the backlog wouldn't have been created over the weekend.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Mahoney.
2 things. I mean, that is a something that the state needs to address. We need to actually fix that particular problem at the Hoffman Yards. It's got 5% of the rail lines, transit is coming through there on rail. And just a word of advice, my home is heated by zones, and I have so there's 3 zones to keep the house warm. I have an extra pump at hand on just in case something can be switched out in about 15 minutes. So just something to keep in mind for your maintenance people and leadership that directs that.
We have one last question from Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I'm late. You may have answered this, but I was wondering if there are sufficient sidings, bypasses, or whatever you call them, to handle the volume of freight that you have moving now through there, and the passengers.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, unless you have situations such as the ones we've been experiencing for the past couple months with the weather causing problems. Typically, the flow of traffic is much smoother. But because of the weather situations, there has been a backup of traffic caused in part by track problems, in part by equipment problems, and then, as I mentioned, fixing any problem takes that much longer because we can only have our people working outside for 20 minutes at a time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, just to wrap up this part of the hearing, I'm encouraged that the service has now been at least functioning well over the last 3 days. However, we need to still get to the bottom of what's going on and preventing it from ever happening again in the future. I think some of it is weather-related. I think some of it is infrastructure-related. That's what I've heard today. And so I would encourage that we continue to see these improvements. But if we continue, again, we have a long-range forecast of below zero for the next week or so, mornings at least below zero. And if this happens again in the next week or so, we're going to need to have a longer hearing and much more in-depth discussion of how this continues to happen and how to prevent it. So, I'm encouraged again that operations have been running smoothly on Tuesday and Wednesday. As someone said, we have below, I think Representative Howe said, or one person pointed out that we now have below zero weather all week, and we've corrected the problems on Monday. But let's make sure this doesn't happen again this winter. Thank you very much for being here. Is there anyone else from the public that wants to weigh in on anything that they've heard, or any other stakeholder? Okay. Thank you very much. Excuse me?
I just had a question.
You're going to have to come up here, and this has to be very...
Take your time.
Okay, all right. We can talk offline if you need to. Members, we're going to now transition into the second part of our hearing, which deals with oil transport issues in the state. And I just wanted, again, so that we're all on the same page, people may have seen some of these clips before, but we have some very brief videos of what happened in North Dakota and Quebec, because this is actually pictorially what we want to prevent from happening here in Minnesota. This is the emergency response function and the regulatory function that we want to prevent from happening. And members, because we've had some accidents involving this kind of oil taking place in other parts of the country and in Canada, this has really trained the public eye in terms of what some of the risks are, and we're going to hear from some emergency managers as well. I just wanted, again, if you haven't seen these clips, very briefly, we're going to start with something from Castleton, North Dakota, and you can see what happened there when one of these oil trains derailed. Here we go. This is, I don't know if there's some sound, Mr. Scheer. This is a CNN clip. This took place on December 30th. In just about 20 miles to the west of Fargo. Well, there you go. You saw it. Okay. So, and then we also had a situation in Quebec, and there were 47 fatalities. This took place in July of last summer. Again, similar kind of cargo.
Internet troubles.
Okay. Well, I think you got, okay, we'll see here. We can, we continue to have infrastructure issues here at the State Office Building. But again, I think that you, maybe, yeah, it's the cold weather, right, exactly. I like that, whoever said that. We'll send these along to the committee, but if you haven't seen those videos, it's very telling in terms of what's going on and what we're here to prevent from happening in the state of Minnesota. So I want to make sure that we get our commissioners in and out here. I know they're very busy, and I appreciate the fact that they're here with us. We normally don't hear from the Pollution Control Agency here in our committee, but this is really an interagency responsibility, and we need to get clear who has jurisdiction over what. That's one of the things that we need to find out today. And so we have John Linkstein and Mona Doman who are here, and if you want to come up together. And we'd like to spend about at least 20 minutes up to half hour with you if you have that, and then we need to move on to some of the other testifiers. So which one of you would like to go first?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Representative Hausman, did you have a question
Well,
or a comment?
yes, Mr. Chair, because there was a question in the audience, I thought I would just, as a member of the committee,
Okay.
out of curiosity, and I think it is a relevant point to be made, and that is because the infrastructure issue was raised, who's responsible for that? In other words, is that going to be your bill? How do we? And so
You're talking about with Northstar or?
just the whole issue of infrastructure for freight and passenger rail.
Well, that's,
And so,
yeah.
what I would just say as Chair of Capital Investment and having written the bonding bill, we have in fact consistently had money in for Hoffman Yards, $10 million, on the chance that there would be a Tiger grant. So we would have that money available to match a Tiger grant. Yesterday, we were told by the President that in fact the Tiger grant program is one that may be available to states again, and so it just suggests that we need to be prepared for that state match should that funding stream be available to us.
Thank you. And I think on this particular issue, and thank you for that question, on this particular issue, I think my understanding is that there's jurisdiction in this committee as well as public safety. So we know that for sure, and there may be others. But Commissioners, welcome to our committee. One of the things, in addition to your outlining your agency's responsibilities and perhaps even where those interface with the federal government, I'm also interested to know, I'm encouraged and pleased that the governor has called you together and is in discussions with you in terms of a response to this issue. And so I'd be very interested to know what is going on with those discussions. Where are you at? Do you feel that there may be legislation that you would like? Do you feel that you can address this administratively? And then finally, what resources are lacking? What holes do you see? So those are some of the questions that we're interested in learning from you today. So I'm thinking that Mr. Stein wants to go first here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we actually have a kind of a tag team approach with some of our staff today, so I wanted to introduce myself, and then I'm going to step aside for HSEM staff from Public Safety to come to the table. My name is John Linkstein. I'm the Commissioner of the Pollution Control Agency. We'll be back at the tail end of the conversation, but I wanted to address your question first, Mr. Chair, if I could, just in terms of the governor's direction to the agencies is to continue to work together to look at all the ideas and options for how we might improve rail safety response, emergency preparedness and response, administratively working with the private parties and the rail companies that are responsible for their own preparedness plans, and then also still continuing to dialogue with you and this committee and others in the Senate that are interested in thinking through what needs might still exist. We're still in the midst of evaluating that, so we don't have an answer today regarding any proposal from the administration. We're still working on that. So I'll answer more questions when I come back, but the plan for today's presentation is Commissioner Doman will take about the first two-thirds of the presentation for her agency. I'll come back with my staff and answer sort of the Pollution Control Agency questions, and then we'll collectively take questions at the end, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That sounds like a good process.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members.
Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you
for
very
being
much.
here. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Mona Doman, and I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety. And we are very pleased to be here to join in this conversation with you this morning. As you see on the first slide, we're here to talk about and to present what our agency is currently doing, and some of the challenges that we face in regards to oil transport safety. As you well probably know, that the mass transportation of oil across Minnesota is by pipeline and by railroad. And by pipeline has been going on for decades, but in recent years we've had an increased volume of oil transportation by rail, which is what brings us here today. I have, in the last month, been going around the state of Minnesota doing listening sessions with our public safety partners, police chiefs, fire chiefs, emergency managers, and sheriffs. And I can tell you we were up in Detroit Lakes one day, and based on especially the Castleton explosion, one of the main concerns when I ask our leaders across the state, what keeps them up at night. This is one of the topics that they talk about. This keeps them up at night because of the resources, especially that it takes to respond to one of these incidents. And Castleton brought it to light one more time for all of them. And so our goal today is to sort of help you understand from the Department of Public Safety's perspective what we are currently doing, to share our roles and responsibilities, and then to sort of show how we are working with other state agencies as well. Our work has been going on for many years prior to even my coming to the state, but from my other life, we have worked with the Department of Public Safety for many years. And as Commissioner Linkstein said, then we will answer all of your questions. So our work really involves all hazards, and rail safety is one of many hazards that we deal with across the state of Minnesota on a daily and on a regular basis. And so the work that we do isn't necessarily formulated different for this, although the response in working with our local partners might be a little bit different. And so we're going to start out by, I'm going to turn it over to our chief engineer at the Office of Pipeline Safety, John Wolfram, to share a little bit about the oil piece of this. John?
Welcome to the committee, Mr. Wolfgram, and please state your name for the record.
Morning, Mr. Chair, representatives and members. My name is John Wolfram. I'm the Chief Engineer with the Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety.
Welcome. Proceed. And members, just so you know, pipeline safety is under the jurisdiction of our committee.
As we kick off the presentation here, I'll start with just kind of a discussion of when we're talking oil, the two types of oil we'll be discussing in terms of rail and pipeline safety. The first being the Bakken crude, which is coming out of the Bakken Shale region in North Dakota. This is a lighter weight, more flammable liquid than the second we'll be talking about. At this time, this material is being transported via rail. The second is the Canadian tar sands oil, which is a heavy, more sludge-like, less flammable material. And this is higher in hydrogen sulfide content. Excuse me for the technical difficulty here. There we go. The Bakken and tar sand oil both present flammable and toxic hazards, somewhat different from each other. Both can be very hazardous. Refined oils like gasoline are also transported by pipeline and rail at this time and have hazards as well. Next slide. The next two slides will be kind of an overview of the unit train infrastructure and the pipeline infrastructure. The first slide you see here is the unit train, which is basically a train of 100 tanker cars or more that pass throughout the state of Minnesota. About 10 such trains enter Minnesota each day. The shading that you'll note on your slides there show the population density along the routes. There are more than 460,000 people in the census blocks along these railways. These people are served by about 137 fire departments. Most of the rail cars that are transporting these materials are older, unsubstantial DOT 111 classification cars. At this time, those cars are voluntarily being upgraded, but there's a time that takes. Next slide. The next slide you see, this is the slide just illustrating the oil pipeline routes throughout the state. The crude oil lines generally bring oil from the west and north across the state to the refineries. Pipelines carrying gasoline, diesel, and other refined products crisscross throughout our state. The shaded shapes that you see in this chart represent the census blocks as well, which are about 900,000 people. And with this, there are 243 fire departments that serve these areas. Next, I'll turn it over to Chris Eide with Homeland Security.
Welcome to the committee, Ms. Eide, and please state your name for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Chris Eide. I'm the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management with the Department of Public Safety. I'm here to talk a little bit about what we do in the Department of Public Safety in the response. And there really is a response continuum that we all work under. All disasters, whether they're natural, technological, or human-caused, really are start locally and end locally. Local police and fire are dispatched to a scene. They assess the scene. They see whether it's something that they can do on their own. If they can't, then they call in their mutual aid partners. We have a statewide fire mutual aid system in the state of Minnesota. And also under Chapter 12, which is our enabling legislation, we have the ability to provide mutual aid statewide for all disciplines across the state without a written specific agreement. If the local government feels that they can't handle it with themselves and their mutual aid partners, then they need state assistance. They will then call the Minnesota duty officer, who will coordinate with Homeland Security and Emergency Management staff to dispatch one of 11 chemical assessment teams. During that time, and depending on what kind of an event it is, other state agencies too may be dispatched. As Commissioner Doman said, we have been doing this for a very long time in partnership with other state agencies. So when we have an incident with hazardous materials, if it's by a transportation route, DOT will arrive at the same time that we will arrive, at the same time that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency arrives. So we are all partners on the scene, as well as back in our Emergency Operations Center if one is activated. Minnesota is also a member of the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which all 50 states and 3 of the 6 territories are a part of. So if we have an event that is more than the state of Minnesota can handle, we would call in resources from our neighboring states or across the United States, depending on the scope of any kind of a disaster. So we have a specific state-to-state mutual aid agreement with the state of Wisconsin, the state of North Dakota, the state of South Dakota. Iowa is changing one of their laws in order to be able to do a state-to-state agreement with us as we speak, in addition to having the resources through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And this past May, Governor Dayton signed the Northern Emergency Management Assistance Compact. So we can now share resources with Ontario, with Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. From the company's side, the company also has a responsibility to handle its own spills. So they will first provide the company equipment and staff. So if it's a rail accident, we will respond, the locals will respond, and the railroad will also respond to the scene. So we partner with them to make sure that we can handle any kind of a response. The companies also have contractors that they will hire, and they do have mutual aid and cooperatives among the companies that they can also call on at the time of an emergency. So as you can see from this next slide, there are a number of provisions in Minnesota state law that are related to rail and pipeline safety and their cleanup. Many of these laws and the programs within them are fully functional and work very well to protect the safety of our population and the environment. And it also provides a level playing field between the industries, whether it's crude oil, ethanol, propane, or any kind of other hazardous chemicals. So the role and responsibilities for the Department of Public Safety, Homeland Security, and Emergency Management is, as Commissioner said, we coordinate the state preparedness, response, and recovery for all hazards, whether it's natural, technological, or human-caused. We develop the planning criteria for local government. We also work with them to ensure that their emergency operations plans are based on the hazards that are in their area, and then also then can be applied to what we call the black swan events, those events that we haven't even thought of yet. So what would be a catastrophic event in Fargo may be different than what would be a catastrophic event in Bemidji, which would be different than a catastrophic event in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we work with them to make sure that their plans are adequate for that. We have 3 on-call people in Homeland Security Emergency Management. 2 of them are full-time who work directly with are the state response assets that we have available to us. We have 11 chemical assistance teams, chemical assessment teams, 1 emergency response team, 4 bomb squads, and 1 structural collapse team. And we do call them out on a regular basis when we have an event that warrants it. HSEM also administers the Emergency Preparedness and Community Right to Know Act, which was based on MS 299K, which is one of our authorities. We collect the annual fees and we level fines for releases from the 6,900 plus facilities in this state that manufacture or use highly hazardous chemicals. A spiller is the responsible party to pay for the response costs. That is also one of our responsibilities when we call out a chemical assessment team, is that the team then will determine their costs to respond, and HSEM then will administer that reimbursement process through billing the responsible party. Back over to John Wolfram to talk about the Office of Pipeline Safety.
Mr. Chair, representatives, and
Welcome back.
thank you. I'll just be kind of discussing a couple slides here from pipeline safety. Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety has regulatory oversight for both interstate and intrastate pipelines. Pipeline safety inspects these companies to ensure compliance with both state and federal regulations. These inspections might include pipelines within the state that are withheld within the state, or pipelines that run across borders. Pipeline safety conducts audits of emergency response plans and procedures. Inspectors would go in and audit periodically the procedures and the training for compliance with federal emergency response regulations. Pipeline safety participates in training with the pipeline companies and the emergency responders. MinOps inspectors attend community awareness emergency response training meetings. Here, pipeline companies train the emergency responders in how to respond to these pipeline incidents if they occur. The next bullet here is in discussion with our responsibility to ensure like a liaison type of relationship with the pipeline operators and the emergency responders. Here we function to ensure that in the event of an emergency, there is a clear, open communication between the pipeline operator and the emergency responders. Slide.
Thank you.
The next slide here kind of gives an overview of pipeline safety as a whole. You'll see in the state of Minnesota there's 65,000 miles of gas and liquid pipeline. This mileage includes gas, natural gas, propane, and oil pipeline. Those pipelines, that mileage is ran by 86 pipeline companies. At the Office of Pipeline Safety, we have 13 inspectors, and in 2013, we conducted about 6,000 hours of inspection and pipeline operator training. Next, I'll turn it over to Homeland Security.
When Governor Dayton directed the commissioners to really talk about this issue, we all got together and thought there's not only environmental concerns, there's also public safety issues and concerns, and we really feel that this is probably the direction that the direction that we need to go. These rail and pipeline events are a low probability, but could be a very high consequence, as you saw from the explosions in Quebec and in Castleton, North Dakota, and that is certainly something that we don't want to have happen in this state. The rail and the pipeline routes run through very small towns in addition to large metropolitan areas. So it's not that we're looking at only having an incident in a metro area, but we're also looking at having an incident in a more rural setting where they have all volunteer fire departments who have to leave their jobs to be able to come to a call. Most of those fire departments, because of the issues involved in an accident of this kind, would not be able to handle this alone. It takes very specialized knowledge, it takes very specialized equipment, to do that. So the recommendation to a fire department would be to evacuate people first. We want to make sure that we get people out of harm's way, and then they may just have to leave that train burn, as they did for a while in the Castleton, because we do not have the equipment in our local fire departments to be able to extinguish a unit train fire such as that. In addition, some of these rail and pipeline routes run through Minnesota's most sensitive environments, and they cross rivers where a response would be critical. Most of our departments need more training specific to the types of products and the chemicals that are transported by both pipeline and rail. We have been bringing training to some of these departments. We've been talking to departments. However, you saw in slides earlier that there are 143 departments just on the rail line. Many of these fire departments and their emergency managers in the cities and counties are part-time. So this is one of many responses that they have to plan for, one of many responses that they would have to respond to. And so that makes it the issues a little bit more critical when you don't have a lot of full-time people whose duties specifically focus on that. We do require exercises on an annual basis, and we also make sure that their plan is updated on an annual basis, and it is reviewed by an outside body from the Emergency Management Department every year, so that we can look at it with some fresh eyes. Every county is responsible for that. However, we want to make sure that, again, we can get people out of harm's way and have one group focused on dealing with the fire, and then have the other group focused with evacuating and sheltering and being able to manage those evacuees. What we're doing right now is we are having our 11 chemical assessment teams and the emergency response team having some training that has been specific to oil. In addition to those, we have been bringing training into the state. We have it through conferences. We have it through training sessions. We have a consortium of universities and federal training institutions that have training specific to this type of event. So we have been sending people out of state to some of that training and bringing some of that in. Our hazardous materials staff are also doing outreach to fire departments at their regional meetings. We have a small U.S. DOT grant that's given to us that we pass through to local units of government for exercising hazardous materials in a transportation-related area. However, the restrictions on these grants are quite tight with what you can actually pay for using these grants, and we really have a difficult time getting our local units of government to even accept those grants because the restrictions that have been paid are on those funds. It does not reimburse personnel costs. Particularly when you have full-time fire departments and they have to go to training, they need to do it on overtime, or else they have to do backfill. So they can't afford training and backfilling the position. So having two people doing the same job being paid twice. And we are also, again, providing the oversight and the approval of our local emergency operations plans.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think we'll turn it over now to pollution control, unless you have questions.
Well, here's
of
what
us
I'd like to
first,
do, members. So a couple of things. I think we're going to go about 15 minutes over today, and we'll be continuing Tuesday with people that weren't able to testify. I'd like to have pollution control, but the fact of the matter is we're talking right now a little bit about emergency response, and so to the extent that we can keep it focused on that. And then we did have a number of emergency responders that actually came and traveled here today. and I don't think can make it back for a future one. And so that will actually help the flow of the hearing, to hear from them, and maybe they could respond to some of the things that you've said. And then, members, we can have the entire committee then ask questions of the emergency responders and our public agencies, so that we'll keep it focused on that. And then we'll have MnDOT and the railroads. If we can get them today, probably not, but then we can deal with the actual rail regulatory issues that they deal with. So, and I also wanted to, I know that Representative Lean was here earlier and Representative Newton both have an interest in this, and I wanted to acknowledge them, and Representative Newton is still here and sitting at the table with us. So with that, I wanted to see his, Representative Howe, yes. Did you have a question? I think what we'll, if you have a quick question.
Well, if we want to wait until after as emergency responders go, that would be perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so I have Chris Parsons. Did you want to talk first about emergency response from the PCA perspective?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could, John Stein from the PCA. I just got a couple of quick slides, and then we can be finished with our presentation.
Yeah, but you'll stick around, because then we'll have questions from the...
Absolutely. So just quickly, the PCA's role is an environmental agency. So our job is to protect and improve the environment and also enhance human health. In doing so, you might be able to tell that the lines are rather blurry, and of course in public safety and emergency preparedness and response, the Department of Public Safety engages all the state agencies who have a role. The Department of Health sometimes has a role, the DNR has a role. There are many agencies that support emergency response efforts, and our job with the 9 staff that we have is to make sure that companies are prepared to respond, have a plan and a response capability to deal with environmental hazards and environmental spills and cleanup. So I won't read through all of these bullet points, but it is just simply we play a part in the emergency preparedness and response network. Obviously, there are some environmental concerns that we work to manage. They are of concern because of the potential for environmental consequences. If there were to be a spill or a failure of a pipeline, there are significant responsibilities that need to be carried out to remediate that, to clean it up, and to then compensate the public for the loss of natural resource functions or environmental capabilities. So we provide a lot of efforts to local units of government and to the first responders, as well as to companies that are responsible under the law to do sort of pre-spill or pre-disaster kind of planning and exercise support. We can also order and penalize companies who fail to perform their preparedness or spill response activities. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll just end with the challenges that we see ahead, and it is to provide that sort of support system in a way that is ready to respond to any event, but obviously what Director Eide just said in terms of local first responders' ability to accept the duties and responsibilities, including grants to support, is often a challenge for state agencies. So our job is to improve company preparedness, and we may need some better standards, better legal standards for that to be conducted under the current law. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll step aside and you can take other testimony.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to call up, maybe the 3 of you could come together. Chris Parsons, Ken Prilliman, and Joel McColl, if you're here today.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a question before we get away from this.
Okay, well, we're going to have the testimony of these 3 gentlemen, and then you can ask the question at that. Then we're going to have a discussion about what we just heard and what we're about to hear.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Again, we're addressing public emergency response at this time. I know that we're going to be hearing, if we have time today, from Greg Jeffries, if he's here, and then, but, you know, so there's a private emergency response as well. So there's a lot of activity on this. So who would like to go first? Please welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Chris Parsons. I'm the president of Minnesota Professional Firefighters. My group represents approximately 1,700 professional first responders, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, and we're located throughout all corners of our state. As a result of the increased oil production in North Dakota and elsewhere, our great state has seen exponential increase in the number of railroad tank cars transporting crude oil through all corners of Minnesota. Currently, our state's fire departments, in my estimation, are wholly underprepared and under-equipped to adequately handle a train derailment and fire on the scale of the recent Castleton, North Dakota incident, or the calamity that took the lives of the 47 people last summer in Quebec. This puts Minnesotans and first responders alike at great risk. Our departments have seen or have spent recent decades trying to meet the everyday needs of our citizens while being hampered by budget cuts, due in part to shrinking local government aid and other state aids. I do applaud the legislature and the governor for their work in restoring these state aids. But now, in order to address the increasing danger posed by the shipment of more and more volatile chemicals through our cities and towns, a reliable and constant source of funding is needed. These added dollars should go to the purchase of specialized equipment capable of extinguishing massive oil fires, the training needed for strike teams to safely operate such equipment and mitigate a worst-case scenario crude oil train derailment and fire in a heavily populated area. Currently, our state's local departments simply don't have the proper training and equipment to effectively mitigate massive crude oil fires caused by train derailments in populated areas. The increase in crude oil passing through our state and within feet of homes and neighborhoods has greatly increased the likelihood of loss of life and property on a massive scale. Properly addressing this problem will take a concerted effort by the state of Minnesota to fund and coordinate first responders. And with that, I'll close and take questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, what I'd like to do is see if we could have Mr. Perlman and Mr. McColl, and then we're just going to open it up for questions for this panel and for the PCA and Department of Public Safety and Office of Public Pipeline Safety. So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A from members. Is Mr. Perlman?
Yes, sir.
Available? Thank you. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you,
Please state
sir.
your name for the record.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Ken Perlman. I'm the fire chief and the emergency management director for the city of Brooklyn Park. I also serve on the Minnesota All Hazard Incident Management team. I want to thank you this morning for taking time out of your schedules to hear testimony today about the importance of this bill. We appreciate very much your willingness to consider our needs as it relates to this very important topic. I'm here today representing the Minnesota State Fire Chiefs Association, the Minnesota State Fire Department Association, and coalition of other fire service organizations. We recognize the need for a bill, but would like to include for your consideration some thoughts as we begin to address this very important issue. Number one, oil products are not the only hazardous material that are rolling down our rails. There are a number of other hazardous materials that roll through our rails, and the city of Brooklyn Park, as an example, has both a pipeline and rail running through our city. The other hazardous materials of anhydrous ammonia, flex fuel, et cetera, causes as much, if not significantly more risk than some of the disasters that we have seen in recent history. So I would encourage, as we look at rail safety, to continue to have an all hazards view of these issues. Additionally, as we began to put together plans to augment what the state, the counties, and local communities have already done, that we would be mindful of the fact that the risk profile, particularly through our metropolitan area, changes almost every mile. In 1 mile, there might be a retirement home, another mile an elementary school, and that risk profile will be very challenging for us, certainly from a statutory standpoint, to address, and could create some onerous on local jurisdictions, particularly fire department and other first responder agencies, in terms of building plans that meet the risk profile. I would also caution the committee as we move forward with any recommendations that augment the great work that's already been done by DPS and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, to be cautious about additional unfunded mandates. Minnesota ranks 47th on per capita spending in the fire service today already. And part of the challenges that we have, as Mr. Parson points out,
is the mission that we have been challenged to accomplish already has come to us without appropriate funding. Whether that's additional training, whether that's additional planning, or whether those are additional exercises and equipment, those all come with a cost. I'd like to share what we believe from a fire department perspective would be three of the most important aspects as we consider improving a legislative approach to solving this problem. Number one is a bill or series of bills that consider the all hazards approach. There has been a tremendous amount of effort, energy, and cost already put into an all hazard response capability, as Commissioner Doman and Director Eide have shared with you already. That all hazard response includes the coordination between different types of agencies, the coordination on street level, if you will, in terms of roles and responsibility, and the communication of how those agencies would communicate with each other. So the first and most important piece is to recognize the work that's been done and continue that. Second is with regard to any movement towards the funding or the acquisition of equipment. The collective body here has for many years supported various agencies with equipment, but unfortunately the state is littered with equipment that has not been funded from the standpoint of ongoing maintenance, calibration, and replacement. The CAT trailers, the various state teams have had a long history of being initially funded, but the burden of the maintenance, the ongoing training, the ongoing calibration, and the replacement oftentimes falls to a local jurisdiction. So if we were to add additional equipment for this specific need, we would encourage you to look differently at how we deal with that. And as you've heard, the third most important area from our perspective would be to address the issue of training, to be able to allow us to reimburse fire departments for training, including backfill and overtime. Training dollars in this state, as you are aware, come primarily through the fire safety account. The fire service has spent many, many years defending an account that was established for our benefit, and would strongly encourage this committee to be very cautious about establishing another form of funding for training that would subject us to have to continue to come back and fight for those funds. This time I'll turn it over to Chief McCall.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief Perlman. Hi, my name is Joe McCall, Fire Chief, Emergency Manager for the City of Savage. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time today. I'm here to support Mr. Parsons and Chief Perlman, and I'm going to keep my comments very brief. One of the great risk managers of our time, Gordon Graham, has taught us that there's really 4 categories of incidents, and those are high frequency, high risk. Those would be our structural fires we respond to. We do those very well. High frequency, low risk, low frequency, low risk incidents. And then the subject we're talking about today is low frequency, high risk. That's near and dear to me because in my community we have 3 pipelines. We have rail, we have river, and we have a state highway. And unfortunately I've had to respond to incidents at all means of transportation through my community. The challenge I have is discretionary time versus non-discretionary time. Discretionary time means we go out ahead, we pre-plan, we know what's coming through our community. Non-discretionary time is what you saw in Castleton and Quebec. We have to engage our local responders, our emergency managers, and our partners throughout the county and the region on a short amount of time. We have to work with our railroads, and sometimes that's not always as expedient as we would like. What I'm here trying to achieve today is that we come out of this with something with better communication, coordination, and collaboration through this process. I understand this is going to be a very slow process. I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention this year and letting us be a part of the solution.
Thank you, members, or thank you very much. Members, let's direct our questions to the topic of emergency response for all of the people that have testified in the last 45 minutes or so. So I have 3 people on our list, Representative Howe, Representative Earhart, and Representative Beard. Representative Howe, Representative Johnson now is on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And having come from a background of the fire service, I guess, I understand that the CAT teams are located throughout the state, and there have been varied amount of funding for them. But help me understand how many, I thought there was more hazmat teams and CAT teams available in the past than there are today. Can we address why that reduction happened and how that affected our current status today?
Welcome back, Ms. Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I'll try to answer that. However, that does predate my my being the director. From my recollection, the types of events that were part of the hazmat response were such that it was felt we didn't need, I believe we had 4 large emergency response teams, which is a 30-person team instead of a 3 or 4-person team. Because we had that large teams that weren't working, we had fewer chemical assessment teams. So now I think we actually have more chemical assessment teams, fewer emergency response teams, which makes the response time shorter for a chemical assessment team. They've also changed their protocols where they might send one person immediately while the others are mustering to get going, because the contract calls for them to be out of their office, I believe, in about 15 minutes of the call. They have to be out of their station on the road. So we send kind of a forward team, and then we bring more teams in if we need it. But I believe there are actually more CAT teams and fewer emergency response teams. And this is also one of those areas that, with our own staff, that we have actually lost staff because of budget cuts and things in the past, that we are now supplementing our hazmat staff with federal funds, where before it was 100% state funds.
Follow-up, Representative Howe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you explain the difference to us as far as the type and the amount of equipment that a hazmat team has as opposed to a chemical assessment team, and what their capability, the difference in capabilities they are? Because I think that's basically what we're talking about here, is our capabilities to respond to these types of incidents. And if we've reduced our number of hazmat teams and the type of equipment that they have available to them, I'm concerned that we've gone in the wrong direction.
Mr. Chair, how I absolutely cannot tell you the difference between their capabilities.
I can help.
So good, Chief Perlman will help.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Howe, members of the committee, let me, if I can add to an answer to the previous question in terms of the reduction of the CAT teams. This is one of the classic examples of the fallout from not having fully funded the fire safety account over the last several years. The initial teams, full hazmat response teams, were funded. As those funds were taken for other purposes, these jurisdictions, which were primarily cities of the first class, were stuck with not only the equipment, the rolling apparatus, but the requirement to maintain the training. To maintain a staff of hazardous material technicians and specialists is an expensive, ongoing venture. It's more expensive when the only way to do that is to call people back in off of their regular shift and are forced to pay overtime and or backfill. There just has not been money to maintain this, and it was not fair without funding that the cities of the first class be left with this. A hazardous material response team is staffed differently than our CAT teams. The hazardous material response team would be almost exclusively hazmat tech or hazmat specialty, which is over 100, maybe over 150 hours worth of training. They'd be equipped with not only the equipment that would allow them to secure a scene, identify what hazard they're dealing with, but actually capable of making entry, as opposed to our chemical assessment teams. They're really designed around that initial response, that initial identification, and the idea, as the director points out, of decentralizing those, put some resources distributed throughout Minnesota that local jurisdictions didn't have the capability. They didn't have the equipment. They didn't have the training to identify, do we have a corrosive? Do we have an explosive? If it's explosive, what's the upper and lower limits? What are the hazards? What kind of evacuation zone based on the chemical? Each one of the chemicals that rolls through our communities is going to have a different profile and therefore needs a different response. The idea of the 11 CAT teams, as we call them, allowed a quicker response to the scene. Many of the chemicals that are rolling through our communities, anhydrous ammonia as an example, we have minutes to effectively put in place a mitigation and response before lives are at danger. With 1, 2, or 3 full-scale hazardous material teams that have to, in essence, deploy a semi-tractor trailer of equipment and 30 men or women, that's not a minutes type of response.
Thank you. Ms. Doman, you...
Mr. Chair, may I ask our,
yes.
our branch director for our response?
Okay. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record.
Kevin Reed. I'm the branch director for Homeland Security Emergency Management Response. To clarify a little bit on your question, the 11 chemical assessment teams respond within 15 minutes with 5 personnel. Their original goal is to help that local responder understand what their situation is and then give them recommendations to provide public safety. The emergency response team is a larger 30-person follow-on group that can help augment our teams. When we split that to 11, our protocols now are maybe we send 2 versus 1. And based on that call to us through the duty officer, that's a discussion with that local responder. So we can be there to make entry, to assist them, or to just be there to provide them a subject matter expert. So they have a wide gamut of what they can do.
Just one more question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other question I have is, are there other teams, such as tri-county teams, those types of things out there? And does the National Guard also have a team that can also respond to these types of incidences?
Yes, there are a few that we know of that are county hazardous materials teams. There's one in Dakota County. There's one in Scott and Carver County. We work with them along with, we try to integrate that our chemical assessment teams would integrate with their hazmat teams from the county, and we do training with them to understand what their capabilities and how we would provide follow-on. From the National Guard standpoint, we have the 55th Civil Support Team, which can follow on, and we train with them on a monthly basis with our CAT teams as well, to try to have that total local to state approach to provide the best we can.
Thank you. Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see by the maps you have a train that terminate apparently and pipelines at Duluth. And then you have the same thing in Minneapolis where they may go on. I don't know. But is there any of these, especially the oil that's traveling by water?
Thank you for that, Representative Earhart. And of course, we have that both rivers, and I know there's a possible proposal to haul oil on Lake Superior. So,
and if they do, who's going to handle, or what's the jurisdiction in those areas?
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve Lee. I manage the Pollution Control Agency emergency response and closed landfill programs. The amount of oil that travels in Minnesota by barge or by boat on the Lake Superior is quite a bit smaller, much smaller than pipeline and railroad. There is a proposal to do some shipment of oil out of the Superior, Wisconsin area, and that, of course, would require us to do some preparation in the Duluth Harbor. A problem with commercial shipping is, by and large, again, a factor of the company doing the shipping needs to be prepared, and most of the pre-built preparedness is done with the Coast Guard, who has quite strict regulation for the preparedness of oil shipment by water.
Mr. Chairman, do you do the
Representative Earhart.
same thing? What about the mighty Mississippi? You're not doing any shipping of oil and so forth on that venue?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, oil shipment comes and goes with the market and demand, and there is certainly some oil shipment on the Mississippi. To my understanding, it's mostly refined products, diesel and asphalt kinds of products going south as opposed to crude or refined stuff going north. But there is some shipment on the river.
Follow up, Representative Earhart?
No, I just think that that's another factor that we haven't even mentioned here. So.
I appreciate your bringing that up. Representative Beard, followed by Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Earhart just gave me jogged my memory that in the Port of Savage there was a place called Port Richards, I believe, that was an asphalt terminal. They used to get barge loads of asphalt until I think the trucks beat them on truck rate and the ability to schedule their deliveries and so on a little more frequently, which is one of the comments I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman. In northern Scott County, we got a pretty fantastic organization called Scale. You've heard me brag about it, so you're sick of it, I'm sure.
I went to one of the meetings, Representative.
And we enjoyed your company. Thank you for coming, Mr. Chair. Chief McCall knows about this, and I'm going to just brag for a moment on his colleagues in Shakopee, Prior Lake, Course Cross in Dakota County and Burnsville, and the Medwakaning community, Sioux community also has a pretty fantastic fire department. They all work together. And they've all got this plan of attack where they trade equipment. Actually, one city will buy a piece of equipment that's going to be useful in 2 or 3 cities so that each city doesn't have to have a ladder that can reach so far or a machine that can foam so much of an explosive situation. We tend to collaborate and trade back and forth and plan our purchases accordingly. That's a pretty important deal. I also want to point out that the industrial park between Savage and Shakopee, several of the industries in that park, including RAR Malting, I believe Certainteed, I think Cargill participates, they frequently buy and donate equipment to the fire departments that's specific to a unique threat they see in the corridor there in northern Scott County. And that's something I think we want to keep in mind, that there are people of goodwill and good intentions out here that are already maybe several blocks ahead of us when it comes to accommodating these things. In our district, we have one main railroad, Union Pacific, runs east and west, and a couple of branches there that serves the industrial park. And I'll remind you that a few years ago, we were before the bonding committee as Scale, looking for the joint regional training facility, the public safety training facility. And one of the things we do there, besides fire safety, is we actually train public works people with how to handle fires once the stuff gets into the storm sewers. Oh, by the way, you never thought of that, did you? Well, it's an important thing to do. We also, because we have the Union Pacific running east and west through the district, Union Pacific has participated, and I want to make that very clear. The railroads are working with us as far as I know, and they've participated by donating some tank cars to train public safety folks on how to shut a valve, how to recognize where the threat is coming, how to handle a derailment, how to handle an immersed tank car. Anything you can conceive of is trained in the regional public training facility that's in Jordan that Chief McCall is a part of. So I just wanted to put that on the table, Mr. Chairman. There are people, excuse me, another cup of coffee must be necessary. The railroad is participating, maybe not as much as we would like them to, and crude oil does not run through Scott County, at least to my knowledge, but a lot of ethanol runs through my district, a lot of chlorine gas runs through my district, anhydrous ammonia, propane, butane, you think of it, it runs through my district. And here's another little deal. It doesn't always run through on the railroads. In fact, more of it comes through on trucks, on Highway 101, Highway 13, and 169, than comes through on the railroads. So as we're considering a public safety response to this, Mr. Chairman and members, there's a lot going on here, and I think if we can communicate a little better, that'd be a good thing. But I just want to give credit where credit's due, that some people have already been a few blocks ahead of us. They don't necessarily call a press conference when they do it. They just do what we ask them to do. And people like Chief McCall are people that are helping to lead that charge in Scott County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, Benson, and then Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question, it relates to small volunteer fire departments. Where I live, highway accidents It's the relatively small volunteer fire departments who are the first to respond to an emergency. And I'm curious if that's also the case along what I call the High Line, where there's communities like Motley or Wadena. Would one expect a volunteer fire department to respond to a Castleton-like situation? Would those be the first folks on the scene?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, absolutely, obviously, we're first line of defense, first response team. We're going to get there and begin assessment right away. That's about all we're going to be able to do at this time is assessment and evacuation. Obviously, on a situation such as this, we're immediately going to enact our box alarms or get our mutual aid partners coming. We're going to notify the state duty officer, put them on notice, and so our state teams can get in line to start working with us, with our local responders.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Representative.
And then to follow up, I was struck by that those state teams could respond within 15 minutes. Is that true across the state? Did I hear that correctly?
They're in
Design.
service within 15 minutes.
There would be, and that would be true in Motley or Wadena or those kind of communities.
They would be leaving their home station within 15 minutes. So the call comes, they will leave their home station. It may take them 30 minutes to get there. It may take them an hour to get there, but they must leave their home station within 15 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I could add to that, sir.
Proceed.
The point raises is a very good point. In addition to the fact that these volunteer fire departments would be called upon to respond, we're also, there never seems to be a one-dimensional issue that impacts the fire service. The other issue today is from a recruitment and retention. That volunteer fire department at 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon might only have 2 or 3 people that are available to respond. When you're talking about the need to evacuate or at least create a secure perimeter, 2 or 3 people and a couple of full-time police officers is going to be woefully short of what's needed.
Mr. Chair, follow-up, Representative Johnson.
And then my follow-up on that would be, and again, I'm focusing on these small volunteer departments in the small communities. I'm thinking about what training is available, and I'm aware of that very situation that you just mentioned where there's frequently just a couple of guys in town that are really available. In light of what we know with the expanded danger with the unit trains coming through carrying the oil, is there anything being done to address both the potential shortage of officers to respond and also the training needs of the overall department to respond to a crisis like we observed outside of Castleton?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the challenges within the Minnesota Fire Service, and particularly those fire departments that are protected still by volunteer or strictly paid on-call fire departments, are significant. The demands on these firefighters today, not just to respond, but to keep current. When I started in the fire service, we needed to know how to put out fires. Today, we'll use the term again, we're an all-hazard response agency. Doesn't matter whether it's a fire, a wreck, a train derailment, a plane falls out of the sky, the dam bursts, or someone taints the water. I have jokingly said if a rocket lands in City Hall and oozes blue goo out, you're going to call the fire department to figure out what it is. The reality is it's becoming more and more difficult just to keep firefighters trained to a firefighting standard. When you add all of these, you're talking about a load on volunteer firefighters which is virtually impossible, even in larger cities, to engage firefighters in devoting that much time away from other jobs, family, faith, and other interests. So it is very challenging to keep our firefighters current, which also means it's very challenging to keep our firefighters safe. Firefighters responding from these small communities may lack the basic information to understand just perimeter control, evacuation zones, and ways in which to protect themselves despite having a heart for wanting to save others.
Mr. Chair, one last. I just want to finish by saying I recognize what you're talking about, and where I live, it's slightly different issues, but it's amazing the role that these folks play. They're key leaders in our communities, and I also like your point about keeping our volunteer firefighters safe, And so I would just hope that that this be recognized, and somehow this legislature, whether it's this committee or whomever would have jurisdiction, that we've got to pay attention to that, especially again in the smaller communities where really our best folks are providing essential services. So thank you very much.
Mr. Parsons, did you want to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I wanted to point out, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the difference in the type of response that we're looking at. We're talking about first responders leaving their station within 15 minutes, the CAT teams, the hazmat teams. But the issue here, and I think the impetus for this hearing, is the type of incident that we're now looking at, and that's these crude oil fires. With massive explosions, the ability to level an entire town. When you look at the aerial photos of the Castleton incident, if that train was another 1,000 feet down the track, that town is not there. That fire department is probably not there, able to respond because they may have been killed or gravely injured. So, our state does a very good job and trains very well for spills, leaks, that sort of things. The railroads do provide tank cars for training, but now we're dealing with trains that are up to 2 miles long. We have, as I pointed out before, an exponential increase in crude oil running through our state. The types of incidents, the dangers that are posed are different now, and need different equipment than our current response teams have.
Okay, so members, thank you, Mr. Parsons. I have 5 more people on the list, and we're already over time. So if people could make their questions brief and the responses brief, and I apologize, we have so many more people on who want to testify, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to continue the hearing. I'll have some closing comments after we do this back and forth, but Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had ongoing talks for probably 2 decades in Rochester about rail safety, and I know that's primarily why we're here today.
Yeah.
But I have heard on a couple of occasions, of course, the idea about all response, and since we're talking public safety, I want us to be mindful of something that Representative Beard brought out, is in fact that we have as much being transported. Right next to St. Mary's, there's a gas station, and there's a tanker that has to fill that up on a pretty frequent basis. That when we consider funding streams that ultimately will help the public safety sector be able to respond to these emergency situations, that in my mind, it's as I've seen, or at least notes that I've seen, in terms of how we might fund that we also, just not focus that funding stream from rail and oil, and that we look at a holistic in terms of an all response being, we do have ethanol, we do have a number of other chemicals, and the only thing that I've seen so far is that we're proposing potentially a bill that would assess an amount on, and we'll get to this, so I'm going to stop. But I mean, just that we're not saying, to the rail industry we're going to assess a fee on whatever, and then not take a look at all the other things, including pipelines, including trucks, and so on.
Yeah. Well, I think we're certainly pipelines are a part of this. We've learned also from Representative Beard about trucking. This is, I'll use this opportunity to say that we're just at a very early stage, Representative Benson. But one thing that is very clear is that we are, and Mr. Parsons had alluded to this and others, that we are dealing with a new and potentially very volatile kind of substance that's being transported through our state. And we didn't even get into the characteristics of this. A little bit we did, and there was a directive just earlier this week from the federal government related to the hazardous nature of this oil and how it's different than other hazards. So, so we've got a lot of work to do, and your point is well taken. But I do want to make the point that this is a pretty new and unique issue on the table for us, and that's why we're having this series of hearings. Representative Bernardi, Mason, Earhart, and then we'll wrap up shortly after that. Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll let you decide if you'd like them to respond or if you'd like to have it get in writing to the committee. So I'll let you decide.
Okay.
So how will tools and resources get to our local first responders, and what are the plans for training, for rolling out local preparedness training?
I'm sorry,
Are you
Mr. Chair,
directing
would
that
you...
to...
Well, I think it's probably, I don't know, who's at Homeland, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if it's Homeland
Ms. Ide,
Security.
you want Ms. Ide to answer that question?
She's coming up. Is that what's currently in place? Is that what you're asking?
No, Mr. Chair, we're coming across, there's a number of things that are coming to our attention that need to be making sure that we have the resources and training to our first responders, and what are the plans to make sure that our local first responders are getting the training that they need.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we currently have a training program. So we provide training locally. We send people from departments out of state. We would continue to do that. Obviously, we're on a smaller scale right now than if something like this were to take place. It would have to be within the scope of the size of our staff that we have this now. So that would be something that this committee would have to consider when talking about increasing the training that is available. And now I've forgotten your second question.
Well, Mr. Chair, and thank you. This came from somebody in the community in which I represent in my county, and really, they're on the front lines of this, and their budgets are they're the ones that have to make sure that these people are trained, and they want to know how are they going to get the local resources to the first responders to be able to have the tools and the resources to do this work.
Ms. Ide.
Mr. Chair and Representative, I guess that would be a decision that that the legislature would have to make as to how they would be bringing the types of resources and the types of reimbursements that we would have to make in order for your local responders to be able to have the tools and to be able to have the training that would really be necessary for a new type of a hazard.
And Representative Bernardi, thank you very much. I think you capsulized the challenge before us. Representative Bernardi, I mean, that is exactly what we have, the task before us, is to identify what gaps, if any, exist, and then how to properly fund those gaps. Nothing is for free, and we already had some questions about, from Representative Benson about what are some options to fund this. So that is the work before us. This is just an initial kind of accounting of getting the committee up to speed on who is responsible for what. And we're going to hear more from MnDOT and the railroads next week. And then, given the information that we glean from these hearings, then we've got a collaborative process with the stakeholders to see if we can come up with something in very short time, given the session that we have here. So, Representative Mason, and then we'll close out with Representative Earhart. I know there's a couple people that may not be able to make it on Tuesday, but we don't have a lot of folks on our committee. There's going to be another bite at the apple on March 12th. I don't know if we can work through that with Mr. Brown, but Representative Mason.
Mr. Chair, thank you. This is mainly a comment. The City of Eagan has had an incredible fire department, volunteer fire department for many, many years. And I remember when they finally hired a full-time fire chief. That was an incredibly important movement. And yesterday on the front page of the St. Paul Pioneer Press, there was an article where the city is now going to be hiring 4 full-time firemen for the first time ever, because it is getting to be so very difficult to maintain coverage during the day. So you might want to take look at that article as well for some more details. And if anybody wants to respond to that, thank you.
Is that okay?
In the interest of time, comments well taken. We appreciate the support.
Okay. Representative Earhart, and then I'll have a couple of closing thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a lighter note, Chief Perlman, with all the things you enumerated that you have to respond to, do you still respond to a cat in the tree?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Earhart, we've learned the hard way that cats don't really want to be rescued, and you never see a cat skeleton in a tree. They find everything.
Thank you, Representative Earhart. Okay, so here's the situation, folks. I appreciate everybody sticking around overtime. My apologies to MnDOT. My apologies to members of the rail union. My apologies to the railroad industry that's here. We covered a lot of ground today. I think as you now, I think, know, there's a lot more ground left to be covered. We're going to take up where we left off on Tuesday. And so, again, I hope Mr. Qualley can make it. I hope that the emergency responders and others from the private sector who are scheduled can make it. We also plan on or around March 12th to have another hearing and hopefully some legislation by then that we can work on with the stakeholders that are here today and that are going to testify Tuesday. It may be a simple bill, a short bill. It may be something more involved. But I do believe after today that there is a role for the legislature, a strong role for the legislature, both in identifying emergency response gaps and funding them. The reason that we're focusing on emergency response, members, is that much of the regulatory regimen for oil transportation, be it pipeline, truck, or rail, is federal. Emergency response is something that we have some jurisdiction over. So when Commissioner Doman had said that this keeps her up at night, I think that's something we should all take very, very seriously when the Commissioner of Public Safety has concerns. And I think other public agencies have identified challenges and concerns, and certainly the first responders that were here identified challenges and concerns, resources, and identifying this as a unique and new issue for us to address. So there's much work to be done. This is just the first. I thank so much the people that have come to testify. My apologies again, but I think this speaks to the fact that we have many stakeholders and much to discuss. So on Tuesday at 10 a.m. here, I hope that we can have MnDOT back. I'm sorry, Wednesday, excuse me, Wednesday. Tuesday we have a hearing on the airports, but that's another matter. Wednesday, this Wednesday, we will have we will continue our hearing and on the 5th at 10 a.m. in this room with the people that hopefully can come back that weren't able to testify today. And so please contact me or Mr. Scheer if there are some issues with your being able to attend on Wednesday, and we'll try to accommodate your schedules as best as possible. This meeting is adjourned.